Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make over a few items and we're going to start with this little trunk. And I think it's really cute, but it's not old. It's a new one and or a new-ish one. And I like all the decor on the outside, but it just doesn't have a vintage look at all to it. So I want to make it look more like a vintage style trunk. So I'm going to start by painting the entire piece with the color sea glass. And this is a Dixie Belle color. But one coat covers it pretty well. And so I just give it the one coat and then let it dry. And I also paint all the hardware and the little straps down the corners. I just paint the whole thing. The bottom is black though, just like the inside, so I'm not going to paint the bottom. And because I do want this to look vintage, then I'm going to, once this dries, I'm going to use some antiquing glaze, and this is Van Dyke Brown, and this is a Dixie Belle glaze. And so I'm just working in small sections, and I'm putting a little on and then wiping it off. And I'm even using a damp cloth on this. I started here trying to use a dry one and decided to just use a damp cloth so that I could make sure and not get too much on it, because I can always add more if I don't think it's dark enough. But once you get it too dark and let that dry, it's really hard to get that off. But as you can see here, it was just a little browner than I wanted, so I switched over to my damp cloth and I was able to get the shade that I wanted. Now I could have used a brown wax here, but I just like the color that I get. You get almost a caramel tone with this antiquing glaze, and you get more brown with the brown wax. Now I didn't mention that I used my orbital sander on this because I wanted to get some distressing from it. When I used that glaze, I wanted to get several different tones. So like I said, I gave it a pretty good sanding, and then I did this antiquing glaze on it. This color makes me think of those overnight suitcases that you used to see a lot, where I guess it was a makeup suitcase. But definitely with this color on it, it makes me think of that. Now I'm using my stamp, and this is the IOD Kind Disregard stamp. And if you've watched me long, you know that I use this a lot. And I've inked it up, but I didn't put a lot of ink on it, so that you just kind of had that faint script in the back. And I felt like this added another layer of interest to this. And I'm just going to do this on all sides. Now I ordered my stencil from Etsy a couple years ago. And this is one that's a little hard to get in. People sell out of it very quickly. So, but they're definitely worth the money. This is one of the more expensive stencils, but it's well worth the money because I've used it, and I doubt I'll ever have to replace it, but if I need to, I definitely will. And now I'm using a transfer, and I don't like to overdo transfers. I just like to have just a little bit of interest added with them, and this is one that I've been using for some time. This is a Dixie Belle transfer called Buds and Branches. And I'm just I've cut pieces apart because I don't use them as large stencils usually, or as large transfers usually. I usually just kind of cut them apart, and then I can kind of place them piece by piece, and then you don't have so much money in your pieces. Plus, you don't. It's not overwhelming with all the color. So this to me just adds a little bit without making it look overdone. So I just kind of, if I put it on the upper part of one side, I usually put a little something on the lower part of the other side. I don't like to put things exactly even. I just like to have little hints of it here and there. And then I decided with this piece, once I get these transfers on, that I'm going to add a handle on the top, because like I said, this does make me think of those makeup cases, and obviously I'm not going to use a handle like that. I just have a cast iron handle that that I felt like fit on the top well. And so I painted that cast iron handle this same color of sea glass, and then also used the antiquing glaze on it, and then I'll just screw that to the top of this. So what I do is drill a couple of holes, or a couple holes on each side rather, and then put some nuts and bolts, short little nuts and bolts in it, and so it was very easy to add a handle to. And these purple flowers are not really a color that I would use much, because I feel like they're bold, and that's another reason I'm just putting just a little on here. But as it turns out, this purple looks really good with this sea glass blue. And then once I get all these transfers on here, then I'm just going to add some extra stamps. And so I'm putting a couple of butterflies on here, and I actually got this set from the Dollar Tree. And so they're actually getting several clear stamps in, and I feel like that's a really good bargain. But so I'm just putting a couple of butterflies on here, and then I'll add an extra script stencil on the bottom, and then once I put my handle on the top, then this little case will be finished. And I think it's really, really making a big difference in this piece. And I know, like I said, that all the Paris art on the outside of it was really pretty, but it just wasn't my style at all. And like I said, it didn't look vintage at all. And obviously this is not a vintage box, but it does have the vintage look now. And you'll see that adding that handle on the top, even though it's not a vintage handle, really made a big difference in this case. And I thought about putting feet on this, but in the end decided that I just wanted to leave it like it was. I know that some of you may have preferred it the way it was, but for me, this was a big improvement. And like I said, those purple flowers I wouldn't have normally used, but I really, really like the way they turned out on this blue. And then for the next item, my husband thrifted several of these mailboxes. And I think what must have happened, because it has a number and a name on it, and it's just handwritten on there. And I think it must have been maybe a small set of apartments or something that used these mailboxes, and then maybe updated or whatever. But so this is definitely a look that needs to be covered up. So I'm painting the color buttercream on here, and it takes a couple of coats. And using a fan brush does help a lot to not show your paintbrush lines. but it still has to have a couple of coats. And then after I give this a couple of coats of the color buttercream, then I also put a top coat on this, and I'll use a Dixie Belle top coat, but you could use any clear coat that you wanted. I just want to seal this chalk paint in. And then I decided that this needed some character, so my husband suggested to do a clay mold on it. So I'm using this clay mold, and I'll put the name of this in my description. This is a redesign mold, and like I said, I'll add that to the description, but I'm just putting some cornstarch in here, and I'm going to do all 3 of these molds. And I'm not going to go into detail on how to do these molds. I'm sure most of you have seen them done and even done them many times. So if you need to know how to do them, I do have a video where I go more in detail on the clay molds, and I can link that in the description box also. But I go ahead and glue these on before they are dry. I have actually just made them, and so I put Tite Bond on here. That's what I use more than anything. You could use Gorilla Glue or E6000, but Tite Bond, I just have better luck with that myself. And I'm rubbing that all the way out to the edges, because you want to make sure that all around the edges you get a good secure hold. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint this after I've only let it dry for an hour or so. And a viewer told me I could do that, and I've tried it several times and always have good results. So I just paint this in the color buttercream before I move on to the next step. And I'll let that dry well, and then I'll start to work on my next step. So I'm going to be adding some transfers to this also, and I'm being very minimal with this. And this is also from that same set from Dixie Belle called Buds and Branches, and there's actually some black and white flowers on this, and I really like those black and white flowers, so I'm just going to keep this one simple. And in case this were to be used outside on the porch or something, I want to keep it very neutral, because those colored flowers might clash with someone's porch. But I feel like if I keep it black and white, it'll be fine with most decor. So I'm just putting a couple of these flowers on, and then I'll be adding some stamps to this one also. And I'm using my little script stamp here that I use a lot, and just kind of finding me a couple places to put that, because I don't want a lot of script on here. I just want just a little. And so I just find a couple places where I feel like it'll work and add that. And then I decided that that I needed something underneath that clay mold. And so this is from the set. This is a redesign set called Icy Paris, and this is also one that I use a lot. So, but I didn't want this whole stencil or stamp here, so I'm just using some tape and taping off what I don't want, and then I'll ink that stamp up, and then pull away that tape before I apply the stamp on the piece. And then you'll be able to just use one part of your stamp and not worry about getting ink on the other part. So I just stamped that on the front, and then this piece will be finished. And I didn't mention that I did water distress this, and by that I mean I used a damp cloth and really rubbed on this before I sealed it, and was able to get some distress on it. if I tried to sand that, it might have gone down to the metal, so that's why I wanted to water distress it, but I really had to rub hard to get this to distress. But I like how it turned out. And then for my next item is this little jewelry box, and someone had already tried to paint it, and it looks like maybe just one coat, but I really like the color of the inside of this. So I didn't film that, but I put a coat of the color sea glass on this entire box, except for that bottom. I like that velvet bottom, and the inside, obviously, I left that color. But I put sea glass on everything else, and now I've mixed a color of green that I felt like went with the green on the inside, because the inside was both blue and green. So I just kind of mixed some of that green up, and now I'm just kind of sporadically painting this onto that blue. So I definitely want to leave some of that blue showing through. But I also want some of this green, and this is not going to be the color of the box. This is my distress coat. So what I'll be doing is once this dries well, then I'll be painting a couple of coats of the color buttercream over the top. But first, after this dries well, first I take a candle and just kind of rub it all over, so that I can easily distress this. I've seen this done many times, and it works in many cases when I do it, but I didn't have very good luck with it this time. Something about the texture of this box, but it just didn't distress right for me. So what I end up doing is, after I paint the color buttercream on this, and like I said, I give it a couple coats. Once I let that dry, I tried to scrape take a scraper and scrape off some of the paint, and it just didn't work. I got some distressing, but not anything like what I wanted, because what I wanted was for bits of this green and blue to show through. So what I end up doing is, once this dries well, then I just take it outside and use my orbital sander, and I was afraid that it would distress too much and maybe distress too much down to that white, but I didn't have that problem. I was actually able to distress to both the blue and green, and it actually ended up looking a lot like I was expecting it to with the wax. So I just could have skipped that step altogether, and this would have worked out fine. And as you can see, I got some of that blue and green showing through, so I was really happy with how that looked. But of course, I'm going to be doing my script stamp on this also, and so I'm just using the Kindest Regards stamp and just lightly stamping it over the whole surface of the box. And like I said, I wanted that some of that green showing, so I left that velvet on the bottom and inside, and then it still had that vintage look to it. And now I'm adding some more of that transfer to this one, and again, I'm just going minimal with this. And I'm using that same set from Dixie Belle, the Buds and Branches. So just find a couple places to place these, and then I'm just going to stop at just a couple of pieces. And the transfers that I'm using on this one are more neutral. They're in that same set, but these are a more neutral flower. And then I decided on this box to add some feet. So I have some of the little barrel feet, the little wooden barrel feet that I've painted black, and now I'm going to glue those on the bottom. And I'm using Type Bond for this, but I'm also going to use some hot glue so that I'll have some immediate hold and then some permanent hold. So obviously the Type Bond will be more of a permanent hold, and then this hot glue will keep it in place while it dries. So I just put that on all 4 corners, and then this piece will be finished. And I really like the neutral look of this one. It has plenty of interest because those blues and greens are showing through, and then that script in the background. But like I said, it's very neutral. So I think that really helped the looks of this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.